Before we get started, please like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from, and you can support the channel by clicking thanks or joining. I never believed in Christmas horror stories until the winter I moved into the old house on Pine Ridge Road. It was a narrow 2-story home, buried beneath heavy snowdrifts and tall black pine trees that blocked most of the sunlight even at noon. The realtor said it had been vacant for years. She smiled when she said it like it was a good thing. Quiet neighbors, no history worth mentioning. Perfect for someone who worked from home and wanted solitude. I wanted silence. I did not know silence could watch you. The first night it snowed heavily. Thick, slow flakes fell like feathers and erased the road in less than an hour. I stood by the living room window with a mug of coffee, watching the world disappear. That was when I noticed the snowman. It stood at the edge of the yard, near the tree line. I had not built it. No footprints surrounded it. It was already there. 3 uneven spheres stacked carelessly with stick arms and a crooked head. Its face was simple coal eyes and a line of stones for a mouth. No carrot nose, just a hollow impression where one should have been. I assumed a neighbor had built it earlier before the storm. The thought barely lingered. Snowmen were harmless, childish. I closed the curtains and went to bed. The next morning, the snowman was closer. It stood halfway across the yard now, only a few feet beyond the old wooden fence. I noticed it while brushing my teeth. The bathroom window faced the yard, and the pale morning light framed on the thing perfectly. Its head seemed tilted slightly to the left. I told myself it was an illusion. Snow settles, wind shifts, objects move. That is what happens in winter. I stepped outside to shovel the driveway. The cold bit into my face and the air smelled metallic and sharp. When I reached the fence line, I stopped. There were no footprints, no drag marks, no disturbances in the snow between the tree line and where the snowman now stood. It was as if it had simply appeared there overnight without touching the ground. That night, I dreamed of standing at the window, unable to move, while something waited outside just beyond the glass. I woke with my heart racing and frost creeping along the edges of the window pane. The snowman stood closer again. It was now only a few feet from the house. I did not tell anyone. Horror stories often begin with people ignoring warning signs, and I laughed at myself for even thinking that way. I was tired, lonely. The holidays did strange things to the mind. Each night, the snowman moved closer. I began documenting it. Photos taken at the same time every night. Measurements marked in the snow with a shovel handle. The distance shrank with terrifying precision. 3 feet, 2 feet, 1 foot. Always at night, always without tracks. By the 4th night, I noticed something else. The face had changed. The coal eyes were closer together now. The mouth stones curved slightly upward, not into a smile, but into something that felt aware. The hollow where the nose should be seemed deeper, darker, like a small tunnel leading inward. The house itself began to feel wrong. The silence grew heavier after sunset. No wind, no distant traffic. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. When I walked past the windows, I felt a pressure at the back of my neck, like I was being counted. On the 5th night, I heard a sound. It was subtle at first, a faint scraping noise like snow compressing under weight. I froze in bed, staring at the ceiling. The sound came again, slow and deliberate. Scrape, pause, scrape. It was coming from outside my bedroom window. I did not look. Morning revealed the snowman standing inches from the glass, its head nearly level with mine. The coal eyes stared directly into the room. I could see tiny cracks in them now, spider webbing outward. The mouth stones were pressed tightly together like clenched teeth. I tried to destroy it. I bundled up, grabbed a shovel, and swung hard. The shovel passed straight through the snowman, as if it were nothing more than fog. The coal eyes dropped to the ground unbroken. When I stepped back, the snow reformed itself, instantly rebuilding the body, smoother, taller, more refined. That was when I noticed the arms. They were longer now. The sticks stretched toward the house, fingers of splintered wood brushing the siding. They had joints, elbows. I ran inside, locked every door and covered the windows. I spent the day searching online, reading every horror story I could find about living snowmen, cursed winters, forgotten rituals. I found nothing useful, just folklore and jokes. No warnings, no solutions. That night, the scraping returned louder, closer, more confident. The snowman tapped on the glass once. I finally looked. Its face filled the window, the hollow where the nose should be opened wider, stretching into a dark circular void. Inside I saw something that was not snow, something pale and wet, pulsing slowly like breath. A voice came from it, not through sound, but through pressure inside my head. Let me in. I did not sleep. I watched the window until dawn. When the sun rose, the snowman remained frozen inches from the glass, waiting. I understand now why these are called true Christmas horror stories. Because the cold does not need darkness to survive. It only needs patience, and it is still outside. The sun did not make me feel safer. Morning light revealed the snowman exactly where it had been when I last saw it before dawn, inches from my bedroom window, close enough that if I reached out, I could almost touch it. Its surface looked smoother in daylight, packed tighter, less like something built by human hands and more like something grown. I expected it to melt. The forecast said the temperature would rise above freezing by midday. I watched from the kitchen as weak sunlight crept across the yard. Hours passed. Icicles dripped from the roof. Patches of snow sagged and collapsed. The snowman did not change. By noon, I convinced myself I was losing control. Sleep deprivation, stress, isolation. I told myself horror stories thrive on fear, and I was feeding it. I forced myself outside. The air was warmer now, but still sharp. When I stepped onto the porch, I felt an immediate pressure in my chest, like the yard itself was watching my decision. The snowman loomed directly in front of the window behind me. Its coal eyes were dull in daylight, yet somehow more focused. I walked around it slowly, keeping my distance. Up close, the details were worse. The snow was layered in tight spirals like fingerprints frozen into its body. The sticks that formed its arms were not random branches. They had knuckles, the ends split into thin, tapered points, like fingers that had been sharpened. The hollow where the nose should be smelled wrong. not like earth or ice, something damp and organic. I gagged and stepped back. I circled the yard, searching for tracks again. There were none, not even near the base. The snow beneath it was undisturbed, as if the thing was not resting on the ground at all. That was when I noticed the reflection. In the glass of the living room window, I could see myself standing behind the snowman. But there was something else in the reflection, too. A faint shape pressed close behind me, tall, narrow, watching through my eyes. I spun around. Nothing was there. When I looked back, the reflection was normal again. Just me in the yard and the snowman. I went inside shaking. The rest of the day passed slowly. I kept every curtain open, forcing myself to see it at all times. When evening came, the light faded early. The house creaked as temperatures dropped again. The silence returned heavier than before. At 6:30, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I did not answer. The ringing stopped, then started again immediately. I answered the second time. There was no greeting, just breathing, slow and wet, like air passing through something thick. I hung up. A moment later, the sound came from outside, not the phone, the breathing. It drifted faintly through the walls like the house itself was inhaling. Scrape. The sound was closer now, not just outside my bedroom. It moved along the side of the house, slow, deliberate, dragging weight across snow that still left no marks. I grabbed a flashlight and went from room to room, checking windows. Each time I passed a pane, I felt that same pressure in my skull, a sense of alignment, like something was adjusting its angle to keep me centered. At the back door, I froze. The snowman stood there now, no longer at the bedroom window. It had moved. It was directly in front of the door, one arm raised. The sharpened fingers pressed gently against the glass. The other arm hung at its side, slightly bent, as if resting between movements. I screamed. The sound felt small in the vast quiet of the house. I backed away until I hit the wall. The flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled across the floor, casting wild shadows. When I looked again, the arm was lower, the fingers now wrapped around the door handle. The handle rattled once. I ran upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom, and called the police. My voice cracked as I tried to explain. A snowman, moving, watching, outside my house. There was a pause on the line. Then the dispatcher spoke slowly, carefully. Sir, there are no units available in your area due to weather conditions. Is there a person with you right now? I looked at the door. No, I whispered. The breathing returned louder now. It came through the vents, through the walls, through the floor beneath my feet. The mirror fogged slightly, though the room was cold. The voice returned inside my head, clearer than before. You left me outside too long. The bathroom door shuddered, not from force, but from pressure, like something heavy leaning against it, testing the structure. I thought of the house history, vacant for years, quiet neighbors, no history worth mentioning. That was the lie. Memories began to surface that were not mine. Images of winters long past. A family laughing. A child crying in the cold. A figure left standing alone in the yard night after night, watching the window for someone who never came back. The snowman was not moving closer. It was returning. The handle turned slowly, and somewhere deep inside the hollow, I heard a heartbeat syncing with my own. I do not remember leaving the bathroom. What I remember is the silence that followed the turning of the handle, a silence so complete it swallowed the sound of my own breathing. The pressure vanished. The door did not open. The snowman did not force its way inside. It simply stopped. When I finally unlocked the door, the hallway was empty. The house looked untouched. No marks, no frost, no damage. For a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion. Then I looked outside. The snowman was gone. The yard was empty except for smooth, untouched snow stretching all the way to the tree line. No footprints, no disturbed patches, no sign that anything had ever stood there. The absence felt worse than its presence, like a held breath that never released. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, watching the windows until dawn. When morning came, I checked the news. No reports, no strange calls, no warnings, just cheerful holiday segments and weather updates. At 9 in the morning, someone knocked on my door. I nearly screamed. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a thick winter coat holding a clipboard, middle-aged professional, polite smile, a county emblem stitched on her sleeve. She introduced herself as Karen Mitchell from Property Records. She said they were reviewing older homes in the area due to an upcoming rezoning project. Routine questions, historical verification. I let her in. As soon as she stepped inside, she paused. Her smile tightened. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked quietly. I stared at her. "The cold," she said. "Not the temperature, the weight." I nodded. She flipped through her clipboard, then asked if I knew anything about the previous owners. I told her what the realtor said. Vacant, quiet, no history. Karen sighed. "That is not entirely accurate," she said. She explained that the house once belonged to a family named Harper, parents and one son. They lived here over 30 years ago. One winter, the power went out during a severe storm. Roads were blocked. Help could not reach them for days. The boy went outside to wait by the road, she said. He believed if he stood where the window could see him, his parents would come faster. They never did. By the time emergency crews arrived, the boy was gone. No body was ever found. I felt sick. Karen hesitated before continuing. Neighbors reported seeing something in the yard afterward during winters. A figure, a shape, always closer to the house than before. Eventually, the family moved. The house changed owners several times. Every winter, something went wrong. People left, some disappeared. "Why is it back now?" I asked. She looked at me carefully. "Because you saw it," she said, "and because you stayed." After she left, I searched for everything I could find. Old newspaper archives, missing person reports, local forums buried under years of dust. I found stories dismissed as folklore. A snowman, a watcher, a thing that waited to be noticed. The pattern was always the same. It appeared after heavy snowfall. It moved closer each night. It never crossed the threshold unless invited or forgotten. And when it was ignored for too long, it found another way in. That night, the temperature dropped sharply. Snow began falling again, thick thick and heavy, erasing the world beyond the windows. I felt dread settle deep in my stomach. At midnight, the lights flickered, then went out. The house plunged into darkness. I sat frozen, listening to the silence. No scraping, no breathing, just the faint hum of snow against the walls. Then the tapping began, soft at first, rhythmic, like fingers counting time. It came from every window at once. Tap, tap, tap. I lit candles and moved through the house. Every pane showed the same thing. The snowman. Not one, dozens. They stood at every window, every door, perfectly still. Identical faces, identical hollow noses turned inward toward me. They had multiplied. The voice did not come from one place now. It came from everywhere, layered, overlapping calm. You watched me learn. You taught me distance. Now watch me remember. The candles flickered violently. Frost raced across the walls, forming shapes that looked like outstretched arms. One snowman raised its hand, then another, then all of them. At once they pressed against the glass. The windows did not break. They softened. The glass bent inward like skin under pressure. I backed away, screaming. The house groaned as if alive. The cold flooded in. My breath came out in thick clouds. Then suddenly everything stopped. The lights snapped back on. The snowmen were gone. Only one remained, standing in the living room, not made of snow anymore. It stood taller than me. Its surface pale and smooth like packed ice over flesh. The hollow face opened wider, and I saw inside the outline of a child, curled and shivering, eyes open and watching. The voice spoke gently now. You finally see me. And I realized the house was never haunted. It was a shelter, and I was standing in its place. I do not know how long I stood there staring at it. The thing that had once been the snowman did not move. It did not breathe, yet the room felt crowded by its presence, as if the air itself was being displaced. The child inside the hollow face did not blink. His eyes were wide, glassy, locked onto mine with an expression that was not fear but expectation. The lights hummed overhead. Normal, too normal. I stepped back slowly. My heel hit the edge of the rug and I nearly fell. The creature tilted its head, following the movement with precise interest. I realized then it was not trapped inside the house. It had always been welcome. The front door was still locked, the windows intact, no broken glass, no forced entry. Whatever rules governed this thing, it had not violated them. I remembered every moment I had stood at the window, watching it night after night, measuring it, photographing it, giving it attention, giving it form. You let me stay, the voice said softly. You kept looking. The child inside shifted slightly. I heard the faint crack of ice forming. I demanded to know what it wanted. The words came out shaky thin. The thing leaned closer. The surface of its body shimmered, as if layers were sliding over one another. Snow becoming ice, ice becoming something dense and alive. To be seen, it replied, to be remembered. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost spread across the floor, crawling toward my feet. The walls creaked in protest. Images flooded my mind again. Not memories, but echoes. Winters repeating, families coming and going. Each time someone noticed, each time it learned more. Grew closer, learned shape, learned voice. It was not one child. It was all of them. Every winter someone had been left outside, forgotten, locked out, told to wait. Their fear soaked into the snow and stayed there long after their bodies were gone. The house became a beacon, a place that watched the yard. I fell to my knees. The cold burned through my jeans. I begged it to leave. The thing crouched, lowering itself until we were eye level. The hollow face widened, and the voices layered again, dozens of whispers overlapping. "We do not leave shelters," it said. I realized the truth then. The house had not protected the families from the thing outside. The thing outside had protected the house from loneliness. The power went out again. This time it stayed dark. In the blackness I felt movement all around me, soft brushing against walls, gentle scraping like careful hands learning the shape of rooms. The smell of snow filled the air, thick and suffocating. I crawled toward the stairs. Each step felt longer than the last. The darkness pressed against my eyes. Upstairs, the bedroom door was open. Inside the room, frost coated every surface. The window was wide open, snow blowing in despite the calm night outside. At the center of the room stood another figure. Smaller, this one shaped more like a boy than a snowman. It turned slowly. Its face was my face. The realization shattered something inside me. I stumbled back, screaming. The reflection smiled. Ice cracked along its cheeks. "You stayed," the voice said. "You learned." The rules were clear now. It replaced what remained inside. The house needed someone to watch the yard. The snowman behind me moved closer. I felt its hand touch my shoulder, not cold but numb, draining. My thoughts slowed, my memories dulled. Outside the window, the yard stretched white and endless, empty, waiting. I fought. I tore myself away and ran down the stairs through the living room toward the front door. The handle was warm in my hand, impossibly warm. I threw it open and ran into the snow. The cold hit like knives. I fell hard, gasping. When I looked back, the house stood dark and silent. No figures in the windows, no snowman in the yard. I ran until dawn. When the sun rose, I found myself at the edge of the road, miles away. A passing driver stopped and helped me, asked where I came from. I could not answer. The authorities later told me the house on Pine Ridge Road burned down overnight. Electrical fire, they said. Total loss. No remains found. I believed them until winter returned, until the first snowfall, and someone built a snowman across the street from my new apartment. Close enough to see, close enough to learn. I told myself it was over. Weeks passed after the fire. Doctors called it shock and exhaustion. They said trauma distorts memory. They said I was lucky to be alive. I nodded and agreed, because agreeing was easier than explaining that something had followed me out of the snow and into my life. I moved into a small apartment complex on the edge of the city. 3rd floor. No yard. No trees. No quiet. Cars passed all night. People shouted. Sirens wailed. Noise was safety. Noise meant witnesses. For a while it worked. I slept with the lights on. I avoided windows. I did not decorate for Christmas. I ignored the weather forecast and refused to acknowledge the first snowfall of the season. Then the snowman appeared across the street. It was small at first, barely noticeable between parked cars and piles of plowed snow. 2 uneven spheres. No arms, No face, just a shape where no shape should have been. I closed the blinds and stayed away from the window. The next morning it had a face. Coal eyes, stone mouth, hollow where the nose should be. I vomited in the sink and called in sick. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. Children build snowmen. Cities are full of strangers. Patterns only exist if you look for them. I stopped looking. That was my mistake. The dreams returned. I stood outside the apartment building in the snow, unable to move, while dozens of windows stared back at me. Inside each window stood a version of myself, watching, waiting. When I woke, my sheets were cold and damp like melted frost. I began hearing things at night, not scraping this time, softer sounds, shifting, breathing muffled by distance. Always from the direction of the street. On the fourth night I heard a knock, not on the door, on the window. I lived on the third floor. Tap, pause, tap. I did not look. The tapping continued slowly, patiently, like someone practicing restraint. In the morning, the snowman was closer. Not much, just enough to be sure. I reported it to the building manager. He laughed nervously and said kids had been messing around. He promised to have maintenance clear it away. They did. By evening, the spot across the street was empty. I felt relief for exactly 12 minutes. Then the power went out. The apartment fell silent. Emergency lights flickered on in the hallway, casting long, warped shadows. People shouted. Doors opened. Someone laughed too loudly. Inside my unit, the temperature dropped fast. The walls felt thin, fragile. The voice returned faint but unmistakable. You changed houses, it said, not homes. I backed away from the window, heart pounding. The glass fogged from the inside. You left the shelter. It continued, so I learned to move without it. A shape passed behind the blind. I ran into the hallway, joining the other tenants. The emergency lights flickered again, then died completely. Screams echoed. Somewhere glass shattered. I felt it then. Not cold, not touch, but absence. Like a part of me had been scooped out and replaced with quiet. I saw myself standing at the far end of the hall. Not a reflection, a version. Its skin was pale and smooth like packed snow. Its eyes coal black. It smiled with a mouth of stones. It raised its hand. Every door along the hallway creaked open at once. The building inhaled. I ran down the stairs out into the snow, barefoot, bleeding, terrified. People spilled out behind me, shouting, crying. No one looked back. Across the street, the snowman stood directly beneath my window, but it was not alone. Figures stood beside it, half-formed shapes of ice and snow, some tall, some small, all facing the building. Waiting, police arrived, fire trucks. Questions, explanations, no answers. By morning, the snow was gone. So were the figures. No one else remembered them. They said I had a panic attack. I moved again. New city, new name, new routine. I never stayed anywhere long enough to be noticed. I avoided winter places. I followed the sun. It did not matter, because wherever snow falls, someone is left outside, and something is always willing to wait. Tonight it is snowing again. I can feel it standing somewhere close enough to learn. close enough to remember me, close enough to come home. I learned to measure my life in winters. Years passed. I stayed ahead of the cold as long as I could. Southern cities, desert towns, places where Christmas meant lights and plastic trees instead of snow. I told myself the thing could not exist without winter, that it needed frozen ground and silence and darkness to move. I was wrong. It did not need snow. It needed memory. The first sign came in a hotel room in Arizona. It was December but warm outside. I woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. The air conditioner hummed softly. When I turned toward the window, I saw condensation forming on the glass in a perfect circle, slowly, deliberately, as if something cold pressed from the other side. The circle faded when I blinked. I checked out at sunrise and drove until my hands ached. After that, it appeared in smaller ways. Frost patterns on mirrors that looked like faces. Children in winter coats standing too still at bus stops, even in warm cities. A sense of being watched whenever someone waited alone. I began researching obsessively. Libraries, online archives, obscure forums. I found stories buried under different names. The Watcher in the Snow, The Quiet Child, The Winter Shelter. Different regions, same pattern. Someone left outside, someone waiting, someone watching a window, and something that learned. It always started small, a shape, a figure, a presence. It grew stronger when it was acknowledged, when someone counted nights, measured distance, tried to understand. That was the trap. Understanding was an invitation. I tried to warn people. Anonymous posts, emails to local news outlets, messages to forums where people joked about creepy snowmen or strange winter sightings. Most ignored me. A few replied. One woman from Minnesota sent a single sentence. "It is closer now." She never wrote again. I realized then that running was useless. The thing did not chase. It waited. It followed patterns, not footsteps. Wherever winter returned, it would appear again eventually. So I changed tactics. I went north. If it wanted winter, I would give it too much of it. I traveled to a small research town in Alaska where winters lasted most of the year. A place surrounded by snow and darkness and people who understood isolation. I told myself that in a place where everyone waited, no one would be chosen. For a while it worked. Months passed without incident. Snow piled high. Nights stretched endlessly. I felt almost normal. I volunteered at a community center, helped shovel driveways, talked to neighbors. I stayed visible. Then one evening during a storm, the power went out across the town. Generators kicked in sporadically. Lights flickered. Wind howled like something alive. I was walking back from the center when I saw it. Not a snowman, a figure standing at the edge of the road, barely visible through blowing snow. Child-sized, still watching the lit windows of the nearest house. I did not stop. Behind me, I heard footsteps, soft, careful, matching my pace. I reached my cabin and locked the door. My heart pounded. I pressed my forehead against the wood, breathing hard. Then came the knocking, gentle, polite. From the inside, I backed away. The voice spoke clearly now, using my own tone, my own cadence. You know why I am here. The walls began to frost over. The temperature dropped instantly. I saw shapes moving beneath the ice, impressions of hands and faces pressing outward. I shouted that I would not look, that I would not acknowledge it, that I would not give it shape. The knocking stopped. The cold retreated slightly. The voice softened. That is not how shelter works, it said. Outside, the storm raged. I understood then the final truth. It was not bound to snow. It was bound to waiting. To the moment someone stood between inside and outside, between warmth and cold, between remembered and forgotten, and as long as winter existed somewhere, someone would always be standing at a window hoping to be seen. That night I stayed awake listening. At dawn the storm cleared. Outside my cabin, a single set of footprints led away into the snow, small, barefoot, heading toward the town, toward the lights, toward the windows. I followed the footprints. I do not know why. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside the cabin, to lock the door and pretend I had seen nothing. But the prints in the snow pulled at something deep inside my chest. They were small and bare, pressed into ice, sharp enough to draw blood. Each step was deliberate. Each step moved closer to the town. The storm had stripped the world clean. Snowdrifts swallowed the road signs. The sky was a flat white lid, pressing down on everything beneath it. Sound did not travel properly. Even my own breathing felt distant. The footprints never wavered. They did not slide or stumble. Whoever made them did not feel the cold. As I walked, memories surfaced uninvited. Nights from my childhood waiting for my parents to come home, standing by the window watching headlights that never appeared. I had forgotten how heavy that waiting felt, how it hollowed you out. The town came into view slowly, a cluster of lights glowing against the endless white. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life, warmth, shelter. The footprints led straight toward it. I reached the edge of town just as the sun crept above the horizon. The prints stopped in the middle of the road. No turn, no fade. Just an abrupt ending, like the person had stepped upward and vanished. I stood there shaking. Someone touched my arm. I spun around, ready to scream. But it was only an old man wrapped in a heavy coat. His beard was white with frost. His eyes were sharp and tired. "You saw it too," he said. I did not ask what he meant. He introduced himself as Thomas Hale. He had lived in the town his entire life. He told me people here did not talk about certain things out loud, because naming them gave them shape. But winters had been getting worse. Children stopped walking to school alone. Lights stayed on all night. No one built snowmen anymore. We walked together to a small diner at the edge of town. Inside it smelled like coffee and grease and something burnt. A few locals sat silently nursing mugs. No one smiled. Thomas leaned close. "It started decades ago," he said. "One winter, a boy missed the last bus home. He waited outside the school, watched the doors, thought someone would come. No one did. They found his boots in the spring. No body. Others followed. Not every year, only when winters were long and people forgot to look out for each other. It wears what we give it," Thomas continued. "First snow, then shape, then memory." I asked if anyone had ever stopped it. He shook his head. "You do not stop waiting," he said. "You end it." That night, the town lost power again. The generator kicked on in parts, but not everywhere. Darkness swallowed whole streets. People stayed inside. Curtains closed. I stood at the diner window watching snow fall in thick, slow sheets. Across the street, a shape began to form. Not all at once. First a mound, then another. Arms shaped themselves from buried branches. A head rose, last hollow face turned toward the glass. It was closer than it should have been. Thomas stood beside me. "Do not look too long," he warned. But it was already looking at me. The coal eyes reflected my own face, pale and drawn. I felt a tug inside my chest, like something recognizing its reflection. The voice came softly, not in my head this time, but in the room itself. "You followed me." The snowman stepped forward. No footprints formed. The door rattled gently, not forcing, asking. Thomas grabbed my arm. "If you answer, it chooses you," he said. "If you ignore it, chooses someone else." The door rattled again. Outside, more shapes appeared at the edges of the street, half-formed figures waiting to be finished. I understood the choice. This was not about survival. It was about responsibility. I stepped toward the door. The room went silent. Every eye turned to me. I placed my hand on the handle. I did not open it. I spoke instead. I said the boy's name. The one Thomas mentioned. The air cracked like ice under pressure. The snowman froze. The shapes outside faltered. The voice screamed. "Remembering is not the same as watching," I said. "You are not shelter. You are hunger." The snowman began to collapse inward. Snow falling away, revealing emptiness. The lights flickered. The power returned. Outside, the street was empty. No snowman, no shapes. Thomas stared at me with something like hope and fear mixed together. That night, the town slept. But I did not, because I knew this was not an ending. It was a pause, and winter always comes back. The town pretended nothing had happened. By morning, the streets were plowed. The diner reopened. Children returned to school, escorted by adults who laughed a little too loudly. Thomas did not mention the night again, and neither did anyone else. Silence returned like a blanket pulled up to the chin. But silence does not erase memory. I stayed in the town through the rest of winter. I told myself I was helping by staying visible, by refusing to look away. I volunteered at the school in the center again. I kept lights on in empty buildings. I made sure no one waited alone when storms came. Still, I felt it watching, not from the yard or the street, from the spaces between people. When someone hesitated at a doorway, when a child lagged behind on the sidewalk, when a bus drove off too soon, leaving one figure standing in the cold. That was where it lived now. The thing had changed. I had spoken a name and broken its shape, but not its need. Hunger adapts. It always does. The first new incident happened quietly. A teenage boy named Eric failed to return home one evening after practice. Search teams went out immediately. Dogs, snowmobiles, floodlights cutting through the dark. They found him an hour later standing beside the road unharmed, confused. He said he had not moved. He said he was waiting. When they asked who he was waiting for, he could not answer. After that, the reports multiplied. People found standing still in the snow, unaware of time passing. Elderly men by bus stops, children near playgrounds after dark, none of them injured. None of them remembered deciding to wait. I realized then the snowman had never been the body. Waiting was. One night, Thomas came to my cabin. He looked older than he had a week before. "You stirred it," he said without anger. "You reminded it of names. Now it remembers more." I asked what that meant. "It is learning patience," he replied. That night I dreamed again. I stood inside a house made entirely of ice. Walls, floors, ceiling, all transparent. Outside figures pressed close, faces blurred by frost. Inside I was warm but alone. At the center of the room stood a child made of shadow. It did not look at me. It was listening. I woke with a start. Outside the cabin, a light glowed in the distance. I followed it into the trees. Snow muffled my steps. The air was painfully cold. The light flickered like a lantern swinging gently. I found a little girl standing alone beneath a pine tree. No coat, no hat, just a thin sweater already dusted with snow. She looked at me calmly. "I am supposed to wait here," she said. I asked who told her that. She pointed into the darkness. I felt it then stronger than ever. Not as a presence, but as an instruction pressing into the world. "Wait!" I wrapped the girl in my coat and carried her back toward town. With every step, the cold resisted, as if the ground itself wanted us to stop. Behind us, I heard movement, not footsteps, breathing. The trees creaked as frost spread along their bark, forming shapes that looked like reaching hands. The voice returned layered and patient. "If you take them, you take my place." I did not answer. Lights appeared ahead. The town, warmth, noise. The pressure lifted suddenly. When I reached the road, the girl blinked like she had just woken up. She asked why I was carrying her. Her parents arrived moments later, frantic and grateful. They said she had wandered off, chasing a light. No one asked why the snow around us was untouched by footprints except ours. That night I understood the cost. It was no longer enough to refuse to watch. Someone had to interrupt the waiting. Someone had to choose movement every time the cold asked for stillness. I could leave. I could run again. But then I would only be another pair of eyes at a window, hoping someone else would go outside. So I stayed, and winter stayed with me. Because now when the snow falls and the world grows quiet, I can feel it listening, waiting to see if I will stop. Winter changed shape after that. It no longer arrived all at once with storms and silence. It crept in through habits, through routines, through moments when people assumed someone else would act. I learned to recognize those moments, the way a sailor learns currents. I stayed in the town through spring and summer. When the snow melted, the pressure eased, but it never vanished. Waiting did not need cold anymore. It only needed pause. Thomas and I began to talk more openly. He showed me records he had kept for decades. Names, dates, patterns, incidents dismissed as accidents or wandering or confusion. Always the same detail buried in reports. The person was last seen standing still. We created a system. When storms came, we checked bus stops, schools, parking lots. We drove slowly through neighborhoods at night, watching for lone figures. We interrupted waiting whenever we saw it. Most people snapped out of it immediately, confused, embarrassed, cold. They never remembered deciding to stop, but some resisted. The first time it happened was with a woman named Laura. She stood in her driveway at dusk, snow collecting on her shoulders, keys clenched in her hand, staring at her dark house. I touched her arm. She did not react. Her eyes were unfocused, lips slightly parted, breath slow and shallow. Behind her, I felt it watching, not as a shape, but as a tension in the air, pulling her backward. I spoke her name loudly. Nothing. I shook her. Her mouth opened, and the voice came out layered and calm. She will be warm soon. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost bloomed across the car beside us. I dragged her toward the street, fighting the pull with every step. The cold screamed through my hands. The pressure fought back like elastic stretching too far. Then suddenly it released. Laura collapsed, sobbing. The frost vanished. The air warmed. That night I did not sleep. The thing had spoken through her. It was adapting again. Days later, a blizzard hit without warning. Whiteout conditions, power failures, roads closed. The perfect environment. We lost 3 people that night. Not bodies, people. They were found alive in the morning, standing miles from where they had last been seen. None of them remembered walking there. All of them said the same thing when asked why they stopped. I thought someone would come. That was when I understood the scale. This was not one town, not one country. Anywhere winter touched, anywhere someone waited, the thing could reach. The snowman had been its mask. Waiting was its language. Memory was its food. I began writing everything down, sending messages again, warnings, instructions, how to break the spell, movement, names, touch. Do not let anyone wait alone. Some listened, most did not. That night, the dreams returned stronger than ever. I stood in a vast frozen field under a sky full of unmoving stars. Thousands of figures dotted the landscape, all facing away from me, staring toward distant lights that never grew closer. At the center stood the thing finally without shape, a distortion in the air, pulling everything toward stillness. It spoke not in words, but in understanding. You cannot save them all. I woke with tears frozen on my face. The next day, Thomas did not show up for our patrol. I found his truck abandoned near the edge of town, door open, engine cold. Footprints led away toward the trees, only one set, small, barefoot. I followed them until my legs gave out. They ended beneath a streetlight at the edge of the woods. The bulb flickered weakly, casting long shadows. In the snow beneath the light, someone had built a snowman. Perfect, smooth, facing the road, waiting inside its hollow face. I saw Thomas, eyes open, calm, unafraid. The voice spoke gently. Every shelter needs a keeper. The light went out, and I realized winter had finally chosen one of us. I did not build the snowman. That thought repeated in my head as I stood beneath the dead streetlight, staring at Thomas trapped inside the frozen shell. His eyes were open, not panicked, not pleading, calm in a way that terrified me more than fear ever could. The snowman was warm. I felt it the moment I stepped closer. Not heat, but a wrongness, like standing near a generator, humming beneath the skin of the world. The air vibrated faintly. The snow around its base was untouched. I called Thomas by name. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Inside the hollow face, frost shifted like breath. Every shelter needs a keeper, the voice repeated. Not cruel, not kind, simply factual. I wanted to smash it, to tear the snow away and pull him free, but instinct stopped me. Violence fed it. Panic fed it. Attention gave it form. I forced myself to think. Waiting was the trap. Movement was the answer. I grabbed Thomas' hand through the snow. The surface resisted like thick rubber, but my fingers broke through, leaving a hole that instantly began to close. His hand was cold. Too cold. I pulled. The pressure hit me immediately. The world narrowed. My ears rang. Memories surfaced without permission. Moments of waiting from my own life layered over his. Bus stops, hospital rooms, doorways, all the times we had stood still, hoping someone else would decide. I dragged him step by step away from the streetlight. Each inch felt like tearing something glued inside my chest. The snowman screamed, not in sound, but in sensation. The cold surged. Frost raced outward, swallowing the road, the trees, the buildings like a wave. I fell to my knees, gasping. Thomas collapsed beside me, free of the shell, shuddering violently. The snowman behind us began to unravel, collapsing inward, like a cave with its support removed. The light snapped back on. The street was empty. No snowman, no footprints, just Thomas and me kneeling in churned snow, surrounded by silence. We did not speak. We walked back to town together as dawn broke. People stared at us as if seeing ghosts. Maybe they were. Thomas survived, but something in him changed. He no longer stood still. Ever. He paced when he talked, tapped his fingers, moved constantly as if afraid the ground might pull him back. The town changed too. Word spread quietly, not of monsters or snowmen, but of rules. Do not wait alone. Knock on doors, call names, move. It did not stop winter, but it slowed it for a while. Then Christmas Eve arrived. The cold deepened unnaturally. Snow fell straight down without wind, like the world was holding its breath. Lights glowed in every window. At midnight, every church bell in town rang once, then stopped. Outside, figures appeared across the streets. Not snowmen this time, but people, familiar shapes, neighbors, friends, loved ones who had died or moved away, standing silently in the snow, facing lit windows. The voice returned everywhere at once. You taught me names, now I bring them back. Panic rippled through the town. Doors opened. People stepped outside calling out. Waiting bloomed like frost. I ran from house to house, dragging people back inside, shouting names, breaking trances. Thomas did the same. Others followed. Movement spread. So did the cold. At the center of town, beneath the largest streetlight, the air warped. The snowman formed again, larger than before, its hollow face deep enough to swallow the light. Inside it, I saw dozens of faces layered, overlapping, watching. I knew what it wanted. A keeper, someone to stand forever between inside and out. I stepped forward. Thomas grabbed my arm, shaking his head. I pulled free. I walked into the light. The cold wrapped around me, gentle, almost grateful. The voice softened. "You already know how to wait," it said. I looked back at the town, at the people moving, shouting, pulling each other away from stillness. I smiled. Then I took another step, past the light, into motion. The snowman cracked. The faces screamed. The cold shattered like glass. When I woke, it was morning. The street light was dark. The town stood intact. Winter loosened its grip. Thomas stood over me crying. I realized then the truth. It cannot take those who refuse to stop. And as long as someone keeps moving, winter cannot choose. But it will try again. It always does. I survived the night beneath the streetlight, but something inside me did not. When I woke in the clinic, my body felt heavy, as if gravity had increased while I slept. Nurses spoke softly. Thomas sat nearby, eyes red, hands restless, never still. They told me I had been found unconscious in the square just before dawn. My temperature dangerously low, my pulse barely there. They said it was a miracle. I did not feel lucky. From that day forward, winter lived inside me. I noticed it first in small ways. My breath fogged even in warm rooms. Frost crept along mirrors when I stared too long at my reflection. I could feel pauses before they happened, like pressure building in the air seconds before someone stopped walking or hesitated at a door. I had become sensitive to waiting. The town tried to return to normal. Snow melted earlier than usual. Christmas decorations came down. Laughter returned to public places. People told themselves the worst had passed, but I saw the cracks. People lingered too long at crosswalks. Children stood staring at school windows after class. Old men sat on benches long after the sun set, unmoving. When I approached them, the pressure eased. When I spoke their names, they blinked and shivered and moved again. Thomas watched me carefully. "It marked you," he said one night. "You stepped into its space. That changes things." I asked if he was afraid of me. He considered the question, then shook his head. "I am afraid for you." The dreams changed. No more snowmen, no frozen fields. Instead, I dreamed of rooms, ordinary rooms, kitchens, hallways, waiting rooms, always empty, always warm, and always with a door slightly open leading to cold darkness beyond. In the dreams, I stood between the room and the door, unable to decide which way to face. I woke each time before choosing. Then the calls began. People from other towns, other states. They had heard rumors, stories of someone who knew how to break the waiting, someone who could pull people back. I tried to ignore them, but the pressure grew when I did. The winter inside me demanded motion, so I traveled. Everywhere I went, it followed not as a shape, but as opportunity. A stalled bus, a closed highway, a delayed train, places where people were told to wait. I moved through crowds, touching arms, calling names, interrupting the stillness. Sometimes it worked, sometimes I was too late. In a city hospital, I found a man standing in a stairwell, staring at the exit sign unmoving. He had been there all night. When I touched him, the cold surged violently. The voice whispered through him, "You cannot carry them all." I pulled him free anyway. I collapsed afterward, shaking violently, frost spreading across my hands. The doctors said my circulation was abnormal. They asked if I had been exposed to extreme cold recently. I laughed. Winter was exposure now. It was not long before I understood the cost. Every interruption weakened me. Every rescue transferred something unseen. I was becoming a shelter, a moving one. Thomas tried to stop me. "It will take you eventually," he said. "It always takes a keeper." I looked at him and realized he was right. But someone had to stand where the cold reached first. The final sign came quietly. One evening I stood alone at a bus terminal watching people hurry past. For the first time I felt the pull towards stillness, not from outside, but from within. It would be easier to stop, to wait, to let someone else decide. I took a step forward instead. The pressure screamed. The voice roared, furious and afraid. Movement spread. People hurried. The pull weakened. I smiled through the pain. I knew then what I had become. Not prey, not keeper. Interruption. And as long as I could still move, winter would never fully close its hand. But I also knew this could not last forever, because even interruptions must one day stop, and winter is patient. The winter inside me grew heavier. Movement no longer came easily. Each step felt deliberate, like pushing against deep water. The cold followed me everywhere now, not as frost, but as exhaustion that settled into my bones. I could still interrupt the waiting, but every time I did, the cost doubled. I began to lose time. Moments slipped away without warning. I would find myself standing in places I did not remember traveling. To bus terminals, empty parks, roadside diners glowing alone in the dark. Each place shared the same quality. People waiting, not panicked, not distressed, simply paused, as if the world had pressed a finger to the pause button. The thing was learning to hide behind normalcy. Thomas called daily. His voice anchored me. He tracked weather patterns, incidents, reports from other towns. The frequency was increasing. Winter was spreading sideways, finding gaps in routines rather than storms. One night he said something that stayed with me. "It is avoiding you now," he said, "testing limits." That scared me more than pursuit. When predators stop chasing, it is because they are setting traps. The first trap closed in a shopping mall 2 days before Christmas. A power outage locked the building down. Emergency lights flickered, casting everything in sickly red shadows. Hundreds of people were told to wait. I felt the pull the moment I stepped inside. Waiting pooled in the air, thick and electric. People sat on benches, leaned against railings, stared at closed gates. Time stretched. I moved through the crowd, touching shoulders, calling names, forcing motion. Some resisted, eyes glazing, breath slowing. The voice whispered everywhere, "This place is made for me." The cold surged violently. Frost crawled across the tiled floor, blooming in branching patterns. Shoppers screamed. Security shouted instructions that no one followed. I pushed harder. I shouted. I ran. Each movement tore at me. My vision blurred. Blood trickled from my nose, freezing instantly. gently against my skin. At the center of the mall, beneath a skylight packed with snow, I saw it forming again, not as a snowman, but as a shape made of gathered stillness, a hollow outline pulling people inward. I stepped in front of it. The pressure crushed me to my knees. "You are tired," the voice said, almost tender. "You cannot interrupt forever," I screamed back with the last of my strength. "Then do not wait." Something snapped. People surged forward, breaking the circle. Motion rippled outward like a shock wave. The shape unraveled, dissolving into nothing. I collapsed. When I woke, I was in a hospital again. Doctors spoke in urgent tones. My core temperature was dangerously low, my heart rhythm irregular. Thomas stood at the foot of the bed, his face pale. "You are burning out," he said. I knew winter had found a way to drain me faster. After that, I changed strategy. I stopped rushing toward every pause. I learned to watch for the deepest stillness, the places where waiting pooled thickest. I conserved movement. The thing noticed. The voice returned in dreams, mocking patient yawn. It showed me visions of cities where I did not arrive in time, of people frozen forever in moments of hope. I woke screaming. Christmas morning came quiet and clear. No snow. No storms. I stood alone outside a closed train station, watching travelers wait for delayed departures. The pull rose gently, invitingly. For a moment I wanted to stop, to sit, to rest. I thought of Thomas, of the girl under the pine tree, of the boy by the road, of every person who had waited believing someone else would act. I moved. The pull recoiled violently. I smiled weakly. I understood then the final cruelty. Winter did not need to defeat me. It only needed me to choose rest once, and it would wait as long as it took, because winter has nothing but time. By the time the new year arrived, my body no longer belonged entirely to me. I moved carefully now, rationing motion like a resource. Every step mattered. Every pause threatened to become permanent. The winter inside me had learned my rhythms, and it pressed hardest when I slowed. Thomas tried to convince me to stop traveling. He wanted me back in Alaska, where people understood darkness and cold, where waiting was visible and easier to interrupt. But winter was no longer local. Reports came in from everywhere. Train delays in Europe, power failures in Canada, ferry shutdowns in the North Seas. Always the same detail buried beneath official language. Passengers remained standing for extended periods. Individuals appeared disoriented after waiting. No injuries reported. It was spreading through infrastructure, places designed to make people wait. Airports became the worst. Endless corridors. Delays announced without explanation. Thousands of people trained to sit still and obey signs. I flew anyway. At an international terminal, the pressure was overwhelming. It hummed beneath the noise of announcements and rolling luggage. People slumped in chairs, staring at departure boards that never changed. I felt it gathering, not forming a shape, forming a system. I moved through the terminal, touching arms, calling names. storms, creating disruption. Security watched me closely. Some people snapped awake instantly. Others resisted, eyes glassy, mouths slack. The voice whispered through the crowd, "Order is waiting." I staggered as cold tore through my chest. My heart fluttered dangerously. I tasted blood. I realized then winter no longer needed storms or snowmen. It had found structure. I locked myself in a restroom, shaking violently. Frost crept along the metal stall walls, responding to my slowing breath. My reflection looked wrong. Pale veins, dark eyes rimmed with blue. Thomas' voice came through my phone, strained and urgent. "You cannot keep doing this alone," he said. "It is adapting faster than you are." He was right. Winter learned from resistance. I needed help, not fighters. Witnesses. I began recording everything. Videos, messages, instructions. I told people what waiting felt like, how to break it, how to pull someone back. I posted them everywhere. Most were ignored. Some went viral. People shared stories, videos of strangers grabbing each other at bus stops, of crowds refusing to sit during delays, of schools changing dismissal rules so no child stood alone. The pressure lessened. Winter recoiled, not defeated, angry. That night I dreamed of the first snowman again, standing far away at the edge of a dark yard, smaller than before, but watching patiently. "You taught them movement," the voice said. I smiled weakly. "You taught me waiting." The retaliation came swiftly. Systems failed everywhere at once. Traffic gridlocks, signal outages, communication delays. People trapped between destinations told to remain where they were. Waiting exploded. I collapsed in an airport corridor, unable to move. Cold wrapped around my spine, crushing. In my mind, I saw the snowman one last time. Towering, formed of lights, screens, signs, schedules, faces, all staring inward. "This is how you end it," the voice said. By stopping, I forced myself up. Around me, people were rising too, pulling each other, standing, refusing chairs, refusing stillness. Movement spread like fire. The pressure cracked, the vision shattered. When I woke, I was in a hospital far from home, machines beeping steadily. Doctors said my heart had nearly stopped. Thomas sat beside me, gripping my hand. "You bought us time," he said. I closed my eyes, exhausted. I had not won, but winter had learned fear, and for the first time since it began, I felt something shift, not retreat, doubt, because waiting only works when people believe someone else will move. And now they were watching each other. That scared Winter more than anything, but I knew the truth. It would change again. It always does. I was discharged under strict conditions. No travel, no stress, no exposure to cold. The doctors spoke carefully, as if words themselves might push me back toward the edge. They did not understand that winter no longer required temperature. It lived in delay, hesitation, silence. I stayed in a rented room near the hospital. Small, warm, ordinary. For the first time in months, I tried to rest. Winter did not allow it. It began with messages. People from across the world sent videos and recordings, Train stations filled with standing crowds swaying slightly like fields of grass in windless air. Airports where departure boards froze for hours and no one complained. Bus terminals where drivers waited for instructions that never came. In every clip there was the same undertone. Calm, too calm. Waiting had learned to disguise itself as peace. Thomas came to see me. He looked thinner, older than his years. He had stopped moving constantly. The habit had exhausted him. "It is not fighting us anymore," he said. "It is teaching people to enjoy stopping." That was the shift. Winter no longer needed fear. It needed comfort. The dreams confirmed it. I stood in a vast white room filled with chairs arranged in neat rows. People sat, smiling, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. Snow fell softly indoors, melting before it touched the floor. At the front of the room stood the snowman, no longer crude or monstrous. Smooth, elegant, almost human. Its hollow face glowed gently. "Rest," it whispered. When I woke, my body felt heavier than ever. The urge to lie still pressed down like a weighted blanket. I understood then the final strategy. Winter would win by kindness, by convincing people they deserved to stop. I forced myself up and reached for my phone. I recorded another message. My voice weak but steady. I told people what comfort felt like when it was wrong. I told them rest should be chosen, not demanded. The response was smaller this time. Fewer shares, fewer comments. People were tired. That night, Thomas called in a panic. "They are building shelters," he said. "Warm places during delays. Quiet rooms, chairs, blankets. They are calling it humane." My blood ran cold. "Shelters?" I remembered the voice. "Every shelter needs a keeper." I knew what was coming. I left the hospital against orders and traveled to the largest transit hub I could reach. A new winter shelter had opened there. Soft lighting, music, rows of comfortable chairs. People lined up willingly. Inside, the air was thick and heavy. People sat down and sighed in relief. The pressure was overwhelming. At the center of the room stood the snowman, not visible, but present. I felt it settle into the space like a host welcoming guests. I shouted, I begged, I told people to stand. Some looked at me annoyed. One woman smiled kindly. "Just let us rest," she said. The cold surged violently. My legs buckled. I realized then the truth. I could not interrupt this, not alone. I looked around at hundreds of people sinking into stillness and felt despair crush me. Then someone stood up, a young man near the wall. He looked uncertain, frightened but moving. Then another, then a woman holding a child. Movement spread slowly, uncertainly. The pressure wavered. The snowman reacted. The air warped. The lights flickered. I screamed with everything left in me. Do not wait for permission. The room erupted. People rose, shouting, grabbing each other, pulling friends to their feet. Chairs toppled. The spell shattered violently. The pressure exploded outward, throwing me to the floor. When the room went silent again, the shelter was empty, just rows of overturned chairs. I lay there shaking, knowing what it meant. Winter had shown its final form, and it had nearly won. It would not stop trying, but But now it knew something else. It was no longer alone in teaching patience. Neither were we. After the shelter incident, the world did not collapse. That was the most terrifying part. Airports continued operating. Trains ran again. Shelters reopened with new rules and brighter lights. People talked about stress management and humane waiting environments. The language softened. The danger hid inside kindness. Winter learned how to speak politely. I disappeared, not in the way people vanish during disasters, but quietly. I stopped posting videos. I stopped answering calls. Thomas was the only one who knew where I went, and even he did not know exactly when I would leave again. I moved north once more, but not to Alaska. I chose places where winter lingered but never fully settled. Border towns, transit cities, places where people were always passing through and never staying long. Movement without destination. My body continued to fail. My hands shook constantly. Frost formed on my breath, even indoors. Doctors said my nervous system was breaking down, unable to regulate temperature or rest cycles. They offered medication, sedatives. I refused them all. Sleep was dangerous now. When I slept, I stood in the white room again. Rows of chairs, soft music, smiling people sinking gently into stillness. The snowman stood closer each time its face almost lined. "You are tired," it said. "Let me keep watch." I woke screaming. I began to understand the final shape of winter. It did not want the world frozen. It wanted guardians, people who would wait forever so others would not have to. Shelters needed keepers. Stations needed watchers. Hospitals needed someone to stand at the edge between awake and asleep. Winter was recruiting. I saw them everywhere now. People who never sat down, who paced terminals through the night, who refused to rest even when exhausted. Their eyes were hollow. Their hands trembled. They were becoming like me, and that was worse than losing them. Thomas confronted me in a small cafe one afternoon. Snow fell gently outside. "You cannot let it turn others into you," he said. This was never meant to be spread. I knew he was right. My resistance was creating a new problem. Winter adapted by copying me. It was creating interruptions of its own. False movement. People pacing endlessly, never resting, never healing. I realized then the only way to end this was not to fight winter, but to limit it. I needed to become the last interruption, a boundary. I traveled to the first place it had ever shown itself to me. Pine Ridge Road, the old lot where the house once stood, burned and empty. Snow covered the ground, thick and untouched. At the edge of the clearing, the snowman waited, small again, simple. 3 uneven spheres, coal eyes, stone mouth, hollow nose. It had come full circle. I stood before it, weak, shaking, barely upright. "You have done enough," it said softly. "Let me take the waiting back." I understood the offer. If I stayed, if I stopped moving, winter would retract. It would claim me as its final keeper and release the rest. No more shelters, no more recruitment, just me. I thought of every face I had pulled from stillness, every child, every stranger, every trembling hand. I stepped closer. The cold wrapped around me, gentle and familiar. But then I did something winter did not expect. I sat down, down, not to wait, but to rest. I closed my eyes willingly. The pressure screamed. Waiting requires desire. Rest does not. The snowman cracked violently, its shape distorted, losing cohesion. I felt warmth for the first time in years. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty. No snowman, no pressure, just snow and silence. Winter did not vanish, but it lost its voice. As long as rest remained a choice and not a command, waiting would never rule again. I left Pine Ridge Road at dawn. Behind me, the snow remained untouched. Ahead, the world moved on. Slowly, carefully, alive. The world did not notice the change. That was how I knew it had worked. Life resumed its usual rhythm, slow and imperfect, but moving. Flights departed late. Trains paused between stations. People waited in lines and complained and checked their phones. Waiting still existed, but it no longer felt heavy. It no longer pressed down on the air like a hand on the back of the neck. Winter had been quiet for months. I stayed away from Pine Ridge Road. I did not need to return to know it was empty. Some places do not want witnesses after they have spoken their last word. My body began to recover slowly. The frost in my breath faded. My hands stopped shaking. Sleep returned in fragments, then in full nights without dreams. Doctors called it remission. I called it borrowed time. Thomas visited in early spring. We walked along a river where ice cracked and drifted apart. He moved more easily now. The constant pacing had softened into natural motion. You broke the pattern, he said, not destroyed it. Broken it. That mattered. Patterns can be rebuilt. Broken ones hesitate. For a while, I allowed myself to believe it was over. Then the postcards started arriving. No return address. No handwriting I recognized. Each showed a winter scene, a quiet road, a bus stop, a park bench dusted with snow. On the back, a single sentence was printed. Still waiting. The first one made my heart race. The second confirmed my fear. Winter had not lost its voice. It had learned to whisper. I began traveling again, but carefully this time. I did not rush toward every pause. I observed. I listened. I learned how waiting hid itself now, not in crowds, but in isolation. A man sitting alone in a warm car long after it was parked. A woman standing on a balcony at night watching falling snow. A child staring at a closed door believing it would open. Waiting had become private. That made it harder to interrupt. In a coastal town, I found a lighthouse keeper who refused to leave his post even when relieved. He said someone needed to stay just in case. His eyes were rimmed with frost. I did not pull him away. I sat with him. We talked. After hours, he stood on his own and went home. Winter retreated without a fight. I understood then the final lesson. Force created resistance. Presence created choice. That was what winter hated most. Choice meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant it could not plan. The postcards kept coming, always polite, never threatening. Sometimes they arrived from places where it was not even cold. Still waiting, I stopped fearing them. Fear had always been winter's strongest ally. One night I received a final card. The image showed Pine Ridge Road after snowfall, untouched and empty. On the back was a different message. "You changed the rules." I smiled. Rules are only powerful when everyone agrees to follow them. I burned the card. Ash fell onto the snow outside my window and melted instantly. I realized then that winter would never truly disappear. It would always test the edges of stillness, but now it would have to ask, and sometimes the answer would be no. I turned away from the window. The night was quiet, and for the first time in years, quiet felt harmless. The postcards stopped coming in late autumn. That was not comforting. Silence had always meant preparation. Winter never announced itself anymore. It waited for the moment when people believed the danger had passed and lowered their guard. I felt it returning weeks before the first snow, a subtle tightening in the air, a faint resistance when I moved too slowly, waiting, testing the edges of the world again. Thomas felt it too. We spoke less frequently now, but when he called, his voice carried the same unease I felt in my chest. "It is changing shape again," he said, not hiding this time, disguising itself as duty. He told me about volunteers across northern towns, people signing up to stay late after shifts, to watch empty buildings, to remain on call through storms so others could go home. Good people, responsible people. They were standing still so others did not have to. Winter had learned to wear virtue. I traveled north before the snow reached the roads. I wanted to see it firsthand. In a small mountain town, I found a group of volunteers rotating overnight watches at the transit station. Warm coffee, soft chairs, quiet conversation. They were proud of it. "Someone has to stay," they told me, "just in case." The words chilled me. Just in case was waiting, dressed as responsibility. That night, a storm closed the mountain pass. Trains stopped running. Power flickered. The volunteers remained at their posts, calm, determined, unmoving. I felt the pressure coil tightly around the station. I tried to interrupt gently, suggested rotations, breaks, movement, laughter. They smiled politely and stayed seated. "You worry too much," one woman said. "We are fine here." Behind her, the glass doors frosted over from the inside. The snowman did not appear. It did not need to. The station itself became the shape. I realized then, winter had achieved something new. It had created places where waiting felt noble, where people chose stillness willingly. I climbed onto a bench and raised my voice. I told them a story, not about monsters or snowmen, but about the boy who waited by the road, about the girl under the pine tree, about Thomas trapped beneath a streetlight. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked away. One man stood up. "We should stretch," he said lightly. "Get some air." The pressure trembled. Another stood, then another. Movement spread reluctantly. The frost retreated from the doors. Winter recoiled, but it did not flee. Later that night, I stood alone outside the station, watching snow fall thick and steady. The voice returned softer than ever. "You are exhausting yourself," it said. "Let them choose." I understood the trap. If people chose, waiting willingly, winter winter could claim them without resistance. Choice alone was not enough. Awareness was. I spent the rest of winter doing one thing. I told stories in stations, shelters, cafes, hospitals, anywhere. People were told to wait. I told them about waiting, what it felt like, how it grew heavier the longer you stood still. Some laughed, some listened. Enough listened. Winter lost efficiency. It needed ignorance. By spring, the storms eased. The volunteers stopped staying late. The stations emptied at night. I thought again that maybe we had reached an equilibrium. Then one evening, Thomas called me from Alaska. They are building statues, he said quietly. Snowmen, memorials. My stomach dropped. They are honoring those who stayed behind, those who waited so others could leave. I closed my eyes. Winter had found a way to be remembered, and remembrance was always the first step toward return. The statues appeared everywhere by the time December returned. They called them memorial snowmen. Town councils approved them unanimously. White figures placed in parks, squares, and station entrances to honor those who stayed behind during storms, those who waited so others could pass safely. Plaques were installed, candles lit, children posed for photos smiling beside them. No one questioned why the snowmen all faced inward toward windows, doors, and lights. I traveled for weeks documenting them. Each town insisted theirs was unique, yet the details were always the same. Coal eyes, stone mouths, hollow noses left intentionally empty as symbols of breath lost to winter. They said the hollows represented sacrifice. I knew better. They represented space, space for winter to speak again. The pressure returned stronger than it had in years. It rolled through towns like fog, settling into ceremonies, speeches, and moments of silence. People gathered and stood quietly, heads bowed, hands folded, unmoving. Waiting had become ritual. I tried to warn them. I spoke at meetings. I showed videos. I told stories. Some listened. Many smiled politely and thanked me for my concern. This is about remembrance, they said. About community. Behind them, the snowmen watched. In one town, I arrived just as the dedication began. A choir sang softly. Snow fell straight down without wind. Hundreds of people stood perfectly still. The voice rose everywhere at once. Not loud, not threatening. Thank you for waiting. The cold surged violently. Frost raced across coats, scarves, hair. Breath turned to white clouds frozen in place. I ran through the crowd, shouting names, pulling arms, forcing motion. The resistance was immediate, like pushing through deep water. People swayed, confused, but did not move. At the center of the square, the largest snowman cracked open. Inside was nothing, just darkness. It was no longer pretending to be a shelter. It was an altar. I realized then, winter was no longer hunting individuals. It was anchoring itself in memory. As long as people remembered waiting with reverence, winter would always have permission to return. I climbed onto the base of the statue and screamed, "Stop honoring stillness." The words cut through the air, sharper than cold. A few heads lifted, a few people shifted. The snowman shuddered. I continued shouting. I told them the truth, that waiting was not noble. That survival required movement. That remembrance should honor action, not pause. Someone laughed nervously. Someone stepped back. Then a child broke free from her parents' grip and ran. The spell fractured. Movement rippled outward. People stumbled, gasped, and began moving, shouting. The snowman collapsed inward. Snow falling away like skin, revealing nothing beneath. The cold retreated screaming. Sirens wailed as people helped each other up. When it was over, the square was empty except for broken snow and scattered candles. The town dismantled the statue that night. Others followed after. Videos spread. Not all. Some towns refused. In those places, winter still lingers. I learned then that winter cannot be killed, but it can be denied ceremony, denied reverence, denied permission. I no longer fight it directly. I speak, I remind, I keep people moving. Somewhere right now, someone is standing too still, staring at a window, believing waiting is kindness. If you see them, say their name, make them move. Do not let winter be honored again. After the memorials fell, winter did not answer with anger. It answered with absence. Snow still fell, but without weight. Storms passed quickly. Delays shortened. The pressure that once filled waiting spaces thinned until it felt almost imagined. People began to relax again. That worried me more than any blizzard. Winter had always punished resistance immediately. Silence meant it was choosing something precise. Thomas noticed it too. It is retreating inward, he said, folding back into smaller places. He was right. Reports slowed, but did not stop. They changed shape. No longer crowds frozen in stations or ceremonies turned to eye. Now it was single rooms, closed spaces, moments where no witness existed. A man found seated in his car, overnight engine off unharmed, unable to explain why he stayed. A nurse discovered standing motionless in a supply closet at dawn, lights on door unlocked. A child found asleep beneath a staircase, convinced she was waiting for someone who never came. Winter was shrinking its footprint, concentrating. I realized then the final strategy. If winter could no longer be honored publicly, it would survive privately, one keeper at a time. I followed the pattern backward. Every report shared the same detail. The person believed they were being helpful, staying late, holding a place, keeping watch. The oldest lie Winter ever told. I returned to Pine Ridge Road one last time. The land was unchanged. Snow lay smooth and untouched, like a sheet pulled tight. No statues, no footprints, no sign of ceremony, only quiet. I stood where the window once faced the yard, the place where it had all begun. The voice did not speak. It waited. I felt it then, not as pressure, but as invitation. A suggestion so gentle it felt like my own thought. Someone should stay. I laughed softly. That was its last move. To convince me the work was never finished. I refused. Instead, I sat and wrote everything down. Names, places, stories, not to preserve waiting, but to expose it, to strip it of mystery and reverence. I published the archive freely. No warnings, no drama, just facts. What waiting does, how it feels, how it grows. People read it quietly. Winter hated that. It needed secrecy. The last encounter came without spectacle. I was in a small town library closing time approaching. Snow fell lightly outside. The librarian stood by the desk, glancing at the clock. "You can stay," she said kindly. "I will wait." The air shifted. I met her eyes. "You do not need to," I said. She hesitated, then smiled, embarrassed, and turned off the lights. Outside, winter recoiled. I felt it retreat, not defeated, but cornered, reduced to moments too small to dominate. As I walked away, I understood the truth. Winter survives only where waiting goes unquestioned. It does not need snow. It needs silence. And silence breaks the moment someone speaks. This was never a story about a snowman. It was about what happens when people stop moving for too long. If you remember that, winter can never finish its sentence. I am writing this on Christmas Eve, not because I am afraid, but because this is when stories listen. Winter is quiet tonight, not absent. Quiet in the way a room becomes quiet when someone stops talking but remains inside. Snow falls gently outside my window, dusting the street in white. Cars pass. People laugh somewhere down the block. Life continues. That is how it should be. I no longer travel. I no longer chase waiting wherever it hides. The archive is finished. It exists now in libraries, online forums, and word of mouth passed gently between people who have learned to notice stillness before it settles too deep. Sometimes I receive messages. A woman says she called her son's name before he stood too long at a bus stop. A man says he invited a stranger inside during a storm instead of assuming someone else would help. A teacher says she changed dismissal so no child waits alone. These are small victories. Winter hates small victories. Thomas visits every Christmas. We walk and talk and keep moving even when it is cold. He still cannot stand still for long. Neither can I. But now that feels like wisdom instead of fear. People still build snowmen. That worried me at first, but they are different now. Crooked, laughing, melting. Children knock them over and rebuild them into nonsense shapes. No reverence, no ceremony. Snowmen should not be perfect. Perfect things invite worship. Tonight I stood by my window watching snow fall and felt nothing watching back. No pressure, no whisper, no invitation, just quiet. But I know better than to believe it is gone forever. Winter does not need to win often, only once. Somewhere, someday, someone will stand alone. Believing waiting is kindness. Believing stillness is responsibility. Believing someone else will act. When that happens, winter will listen, and it will speak softly. That is why I am writing this. If you are reading these words on a cold night, and you notice someone standing too still, do not assume they are fine. Say their name. Open a door, make them move. Do not honor waiting. Do not turn it into memory or ritual or statue. Winter feeds on permission. Deny it. If you ever see a snowman outside your window that you did not build, do not measure its distance. Do not watch it. Do not wait. Turn away. Keep moving, because the moment you stop is the moment winter remembers how to finish the story. And it is always waiting for that ending, the story ends here. Thank you for watching and listening to the whole story. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to listen to the next stories.